Today, I wanted to take an opportunity to reflect on the psalm response from today. The Lord takes delight in His people. This year's theme for our school is the dignity of each human person. And I think this is an awesome thing to focus on as a Catholic school. There are Catholic social teachings hanging in most of our classrooms. What is that? Those teachings are the church saying to our society, to our nation, to our cities, here's how you ought to live as a group of people. The Catholic social teachings include things like caring for the poor, caring for the environment, respecting the rights of workers. All the things our church offers to the world as guides, though, flows from the first teaching of the church, the dignity of the human person. What is the teaching on the dignity of the human person? Because we have all been created, the dignity of the human person says that because we have all been created in the image and likeness of God, we all have a dignity that makes each person infinitely more valuable than everything else ever created. What does that mean? A little example perhaps to illustrate. If you placed every non-human thing ever created on one side of a scale, all the animals, all the plants, all the stones, the mountains, the suns, the moon, the stars, everything in our universe that is not human on one side of a scale, and you place any one of you or any other human person on the other side, the side with a person on it, in the eyes of God, has more dignity. Because it was made, the person was made in the image and likeness of Himself. Respect is something that we earn, but dignity is not. Every person, no matter what, deserves to be treated with the dignity that comes from being a member of the human family. You know, today we think a lot about the people who lived in Germany during World War II, maybe especially during our history classes, and we think to ourselves, what were they thinking? Didn't they know the Jews and Catholics and homosexuals that were all being carted off to prison camps? Didn't they know they were people? Didn't they know all of the prisoners were human beings? What could the soldier have been thinking as he turned on the gas shower for the 5th batch of Jews that day? Yes, we mock them. We think about the people who for centuries lived in the midst of slavery. What were they thinking? Didn't they know that the slaves were human beings? Didn't they see their dignity? What about the Romans who threw the Christians to the lions? Didn't they know that the Christians were people? How could they have cheered during all of that? We sit here from the perspective of August 22nd, 2011, and we judge people for not noticing the dignity in their fellow human beings. But I can tell you this, at no point in history has the dignity of the human person been under greater attack than it is today. In the future, if we get there, students will read about the things going on in our world today, and they will wonder, why didn't they see? Didn't they see the dignity of their neighbor, of their fellow human beings? Let's consider the evidence of what a future student will study when they look back at our society. First, the more obvious stuff. Every 24 seconds in our country, a child is aborted. That would wipe out Ritter's student population in 3 hours and 45 minutes. Today, embryos are ripped apart in an attempt to find stem cells for cures that scientists keep promising will come one day. Other embryos are created in a petri dish for in vitro fertilization. Some of the embryos are selected for implantation in the mother, but the leftovers that didn't quite make it are frozen for a while, but eventually are thawed and flushed down the drain. Estimates put the number of embryos that are currently sitting in American freezers at around 400,000. Then there are the less obvious but equally destructive attacks on the dignity of the human person. Let's take the perspective of a little girl and her mother walking through a museum in the future. A museum set up to look back at our culture, just as we look at the Egyptians or the Mayans today. The first exhibit the girl and her mother come to deals with the women's liberation movement of the 50s and 60s. Many great gains were made during that time for women's rights that were much needed. But it is pretty clear to me that women today are treated with less dignity than they were 50 years ago. And it only seems to get worse by the day. Women are taught not to strive for dignity and affection from other people and from men, but to instead settle for something else: attention. Attention has become the new god that we make sacrifices to, getting people to look at us, getting people to notice us, getting people to click on our status. And this seems to especially affect young women of our age that are sitting out here in front of me. I'd like to offer some evidence about the decline in the way in which we have treated women in our society. First, I'd like to hold up on one hand a letter written during the Civil War by a soldier to his wife, which is indicative of the way most people spoke during that time. This letter was written to his wife the day before this soldier died at the Battle of Bull Run. "Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence can break. The memory of all the blissful moments I have enjoyed with you come crowding over me, and I feel most deeply grateful to God and you that I have enjoyed them for so long. And how hard it is for me to give them up and burn to ashes the hopes and future years when we might still have lived and loved together and seen our boys grown up to honorable manhood around us. If I do not return, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I loved you, nor that when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Forgive my many faults and the many pains I have caused you. How thoughtless, how foolish I have sometimes been. But, oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth, I shall always be with you, in the brightest day and in the darkest night. Always, always." Now, compare that to the way that people sing and talk on the radio today. Ludacris says, "I want to lick you from your head to your toe." Lil Wayne sings about how he wants to have sex with every girl in the world. Mommy, did people really used to listen to that? Why? Didn't they know? Didn't they see the dignity of each person? Did they not see their own dignity? Young girls today are consistently told they are not thin enough, and some will starve themselves to look like the porn star that all the boys keep talking about. In a frenzy for attention and an ever greater need to get that attention, young women wear less and less clothing in an attempt to grab the eye of a young man. And I've noticed this takes place even at church, even in this church. The daughter and her mother moved to another exhibit, a skeleton dug up from the 2000s. "Mommy, what is that plastic stuff around the skull? And what are those 2 sacks of goo?" Well, sweetheart, back then women would spend thousands of dollars having doctors burn and cut their faces and put plastic in place because it looked better. And they used to spend thousands of dollars cutting open their chests, and they would put the goo in their bodies to make their breasts look bigger. Why, Mom? Didn't they see their dignity? No, sweetheart, they did not. At a shocking rate, young people today approach sexuality as if it were no big deal, mutually agreeing to use one another for pleasure. It can't be wrong if we're both okay with it, right? And what about the young men? The daughter and her mother will move to an exhibit where they can watch film clips. Hangover, Superbad, Knocked Up, 2.5 Men. They can choose clips from hundreds of movies and television shows. Mom, is that really how men behaved? Was that all they were interested in? Did they really just get drunk and fart and try to have sex? Why didn't they realize their dignity? Other exhibits will show how at an alarming rate men of all ages are addicted to pornography. Some estimates are as high as 90%. Pornography turns the woman into an object and turns men and boys into callous, hardened addicts, unable to see beyond the physical appearance. Men and boys become people who can only perceive the physical, and they train themselves image after image to disregard the dignity of the women, not only in the picture, but in their lives as well. People are harassed and bullied online and at school to a breaking point. Sometimes they even take their own lives. All this is going on around us, but we mock slave owners and the German citizens and the Romans from early days for not seeing what was going on around them. Why have we spent this time going over all this? Is the news all bad? Is this just a depressing list of our struggles? No, there is hope. And you're in the midst of it. The Catholic Church stands its post. Wherever human dignity is stomped on, its people and priests and popes and bishops stand up, oftentimes risking death, and say no more. Trampling on the dignity of the human person stops here. Ritter Raiders, we have a challenge in front of us, the challenge to swim upstream. To swim upstream takes courage, and courage is not the absence of fear, it is deciding to still act in the presence of fear. Do you think it was ever popular for a German to speak up about what was going on in their country? Was it ever popular for a person in the South to speak out against slavery? Absolutely not. Anytime a person did, they had to overcome fear. And if you are going to be a person who sees the dignity of your fellow human being, be ready to encounter fear in the pit of your stomach. To swim upstream, a person must be alive. Dead things float downstream. Only living things can swim against the current. If we look at the Germans and the slave owners and the Romans, it's just a couple of examples. We could pull in countless others from history. We realize that since the beginning of time, the dignity of the person has been under attack, always in ways that most people do not notice. Are we going to be most people? If you want to swim upstream, if you want to recognize your own dignity and recognize the dignity of the person sitting next to you in your pew and in your class, then harness courage. And finally, where can we turn for courage? How about a man who was beaten and stoned, crowned with thorns, who hauled a cross on his mutilated back uphill for a mile to his death? That same man comes here to us in Mass and offers himself to us. If you're looking for the courage to swim upstream, to begin to respect the dignity of all people, including yourself, the pretty and the ugly, the cool and the annoying, the popular and the nerdy, then you've come to the right place. Today's psalm says the Lord takes delight in his people. God doesn't look out here and see a bunch of bodies. He sees people. People with dignity. People made in the image and likeness of himself. Our challenge this year is to see the same thing.